Tonight, questions are remaining over security at today's rally. Earlier today, 12 News political journalist Brahm Resnik got a chance to sit down with former Maricopa County Sheriff Penzone to learn more details about how law enforcement agencies secure high-profile political events.
Given what you saw over, 7+ years as sheriff, are you surprised we are sitting here today talking about an apparent assassination attempt of a presidential candidate?
I think the word I would choose is disappointed. And because of the business I've been in for so long, I don't know that much surprises us because we've become a nation where violence is something we're far too comfortable with. But it's heartbreaking. And anyone who feels differently really needs to take a look in the mirror and ask themselves who we want to be as a nation, because we should never see anyone in our world harmed, and to think that someone that is pursuing political office, been in political office, would face a circumstance like this it goes against everything that we should stand for as a nation.
Now, as sheriff, you took part in planning for the highest level security events, Super Bowl, presidential visits, a World Series. Give us a sense of what that's like, especially when a president or former president comes to town.
Well, some of those larger ones you're speaking of have so many different agencies from the federal level down involved that everyone has kind of a lane, but there's a high-level planning committee that looks at it from the inside out, from the outside in, and you try to identify every and any potential vulnerability, to include what intelligence you have, what blind spots you may have, and who is going to be responsible for what areas. But I would tell you one that was most defining really was the election and protecting McTech. And although it's much smaller scale, just the idea of what we were facing here in Arizona and understanding what the threat was to democracy, to people, to our vote, the complexities in planning for that was a lesson in sophistication on something that seemed like a small scale. So it takes a discipline and a commitment that you cannot take your eye off the ball at any given time, because once you do, there's a tragedy.
And you're talking about protecting the Maricopa County Elections Department.
Yes, sir.
There. So I've attended many Trump rallies, many outdoors. He likes that. A lot of people show up. I always wondered, how can they protect a president or former president in this venue? Is that an impossible job?
The environment absolutely complicates your ability to account for everything. But with that being said, the resources, at least in Arizona, and I would expect the same in Pennsylvania, this isn't meant to be a criticism, are vast when it comes to this situation. And it really is, you can never underestimate the possibility of where it could come from or how it could occur. And you have to check and double check. It's like being a carpenter, measure 3 times, cut once. So it is harder, but that's part of our nation. We shouldn't steer away from it because we say, gosh, it's too hard because of the threat. This is a free nation where we should celebrate peace and celebrate democracy and not fear violence, but prepare for it. So although it's complicated, I don't think that should mean that we steer away from doing it.
Should we be fearing violence more now, given the climate?
We should prepare for it more. And I'll use a personal example. I remember years ago, as a much younger person and detective, was involved in a case where I faced some death threats. And I remember a more savvy senior detective said to me, you have 2 choices. You can be prepared and still live a quality of life and be prepared for the possibility of harm, or you can give into it with fear, which means that person has already won, that circumstance has already won. So violence has become too much an inherent part of who we are as a society, and I think that is something that we should focus on changing. Everyone should. There is no justification for violence, but we cannot underestimate that it exists, and we must be prepared for it and be empowered by our preparation, not fearful.
So it's a fluid situation. We're still learning what happened. What did you think about the preparation here? You had a shooter apparently 200 to 300 feet away, about a football field, from the president, former president, outside the security perimeter.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in a place to be critical because I don't know enough of the insights right now, but from us sitting in, on Monday morning quarterbacking it this early in it, it is a little bit surprising because usually high points, areas of elevation that are to the benefit of someone who wants to do harm, the detriment of the person you're trying to protect, are usually those that are kind of prioritized to make sure that there is no vulnerability, that you have not missed or left that wide open. There are aspects of it that, as a person who led a pretty big agency under circumstances that had some complexities, you always want to review it and see where you could have and should have done better. But at the end of the day, if a former president who was a candidate for office again was within millimeters, if not an inch, of losing his life, there is no victory in this. That is a failure. the fact that a shooter was able to get to that post, fire a round off, and potentially take the life of anyone, and there was a loss of life, it's a failure. And I don't say it as a criticism of the individuals, but I'm saying as the profession, you can't allow for that to happen.
And folks are wondering why the former president, was allowed to make that closed fist salute, stick his head above the Secret Service officers protecting him.
I would like to have seen it. It's a powerful moment. It's a powerful moment of his resilience. So, I can appreciate the strength that he's showing under that duress. But if it were a team I was responsible for, I would never want you to see his face again until he's removed from that space, which is now no longer pristine. It has been, a threat has impacted you, which means that you don't know if there's an additional threat in that space. And your job is, aside from his motivation in that moment, is to get him out safely, which means we never should have seen his face again once that occurred and he hit the ground on the stage when they removed him, in my opinion. And I say that for his safety. God forbid there had been someone else that could have done harm in that moment.
How will this assassination attempt change the way the Secret Service and every other law enforcement agency it gets involved with? How will it change the way they protect presidents?
I don't know that necessarily tactically, you're changing. It is really just revisiting what could have or should have been done to prevent it from occurring. I can remember significant events in our lives, whether it was, whether it was Reagan, the attempted assassination on President Reagan, whether it was the space shuttle explosion. Like, you remember where you were in that defining moment. You say, how did this happen? 9/11, now this. I remember exactly where I was when I saw it, and the question really becomes, how do we make sure that we stick to the disciplines that we know are the requirements of doing the job to do everything possible to protect someone? And with that being said, you can't account for every detail. It's just not realistic. But in reviewing it, you have to ask yourself, these details, were they missed or were they something beyond our reach? And when you evaluate that, you have to judge yourself harshly.